Auron Solance smiled for the cameras at his wedding, but behind closed doors, his wife Mireya was living a nightmare no one could see, until CCTV captured her final moments, and what police uncovered next turned a missing persons case into a national horror. On a quiet Thursday morning in the small town of Fairhill, 32-year-old Mireya Solance left her two-bedroom suburban home at exactly 9:14 a.m. Her neighbors recalled seeing her carry two reusable shopping bags, dressed in a light gray sweater and faded jeans, her long black hair tied back in a messy bun. She looked relaxed, unhurried. Nothing about her behavior raised suspicion. The destination was a nearby grocery store called Goodmart Superstore, just a 10-minute drive from her home. It was the kind of trip Mireya made every week. No one imagined it would be the last time she'd ever be seen. Her husband, Auron Solance, later told police she had left to pick up ingredients for dinner. She'd mentioned something about making mushroom risotto. When she didn't return by noon, he claimed he began to worry. By 6 p.m., he was calling friends and hospitals. By 8 p.m., he had filed a missing persons report. The story sounded reasonable, on the surface. But the timeline, police would later discover, was full of small cracks. The investigation began the following morning. Officers pulled security footage from Goodmart's many cameras. They started with the entrance. Mireya was seen arriving at 9:26 a.m., walking calmly through the sliding glass doors. She picked up a red shopping cart, paused to sanitize the handle, and entered the main aisle. For the next 25 minutes, she moved through the store, without incident. She selected vegetables, dairy products, and a bottle of olive oil. She paid in cash at the self-checkout station and even used her loyalty card. After bagging her groceries, she was seen exiting the store at 9:57 a.m. She pushed her cart to the far end of the parking lot where her silver hatchback was parked in a shaded corner. That's when the footage turned strange. Mireya opened the trunk, lifted the grocery bags one by one, and placed them inside. As she leaned in to arrange them, a dark figure moved behind her, but only briefly, and only at the edge of the camera's frame. The screen flickered. For exactly 2 seconds, the footage cut out. When it resumed, Mireya was no longer in view. Her car trunk was closed. The shopping cart stood nearby, abandoned. There was no sound, no struggle, no visible commotion. It was as if she had vanished in the blink of an eye. Detectives replayed the footage repeatedly, trying to catch a clearer view of the shadowed figure, but the angle was obstructed. The camera faced the wrong direction. The glitch in the footage was written off as a technical failure, though it conveniently occurred during the exact moment of Mireya's disappearance. A second camera, pointed at the store's loading dock across the parking lot, captured a partial reflection on a window. It showed the outline of a person dragging something, or someone, toward a waiting vehicle. Unfortunately, the reflection was too blurred to provide any useful identification. Police searched the lot but found no trace of a struggle, no blood, no dropped phone or purse. Mireya's car was still parked in the same spot, keys missing. Nothing inside it seemed disturbed. The groceries in the trunk were neatly stacked, the carton of eggs unbroken. A sense of quiet dread hung over the scene. When officers visited the Solance home to question Auron, he appeared composed. He repeated the same details. Mireya had gone, shopping and never returned. He suggested maybe she had been abducted or had run away, though neither theory seemed to make sense. Mireya had no history of mental illness, no signs of distress, and no recent arguments with her husband or anyone else in her life. Her bank accounts had not been touched. Her phone was off. The community was stunned. Fairhill was not the kind of place where people went missing. And yet, the last known image of Mireya Solance was a silent video frame, a woman placing groceries into her trunk just before she vanished. Investigators turned their attention to the Solance home with greater urgency. The missing woman's last known location had been identified, but with no body, no leads, and no clear suspect, the case was rapidly growing cold. Detectives decided it was time to revisit the house Mireya had shared with her husband, this time with a search warrant in hand. What they hoped to find was any small clue, a phone, a note, a piece of clothing, that might explain why a woman could vanish in a public parking lot without a single scream or struggle. What they actually found would take the case in a far darker direction. The Solance house sat on the edge of town, surrounded by a modest garden and a newly installed white picket fence. It looked ordinary, quiet, well-kept, even charming from the outside. Inside, however, something felt wrong. Officers moved from room to room, documenting Mireya's personal belongings. Her makeup kit was still on the bathroom counter. A cup of half-finished tea sat cold on her nightstand. Her favorite, cardigan, hung on the back of a chair. It was as if she'd never planned to leave. Then they went to the backyard. It was a small, fenced-in space, mostly grass with a few patches of dry soil. But a trained eye noticed something unusual near the center, an area of recently disturbed dirt, poorly covered by a decorative stone garden bed that seemed slightly off-center compared to the others. It was late afternoon when officers began to dig. Only a few inches down, they struck something hard. It wasn't a body, but it was a turning point. Buried beneath the garden bed was a plastic container. Inside, police found Mireya's purse, soaked with dried blood. Her driver's license, grocery store receipt, and several credit cards were still inside. Her phone was there too, screen shattered, battery missing. But the most disturbing object in the box was a claw hammer with dried, dark stains along its handle and head. Forensics later confirmed it was blood, and not just from one person. The scene was carefully secured. Auron Solance was brought in for questioning, but he denied any involvement, claiming the items must have been planted. His calm demeanor began to unravel when officers showed him a photograph of the bloodied hammer. His hands trembled. His voice cracked. He refused to speak further and demanded a lawyer. Despite the disturbing discovery, authorities were still missing one critical element: Mireya herself. The presence of her belongings, and especially the hammer, suggested violence, possibly murder. But without a body, no one could confirm it. The possibility remained, however faint, that she might still be alive. Forensics experts examined the hammer more closely and made a strange discovery. Embedded in the grooves of the wooden handle were small fragments of a plant, tiny green, fibers and pollen that didn't match anything found in the Solance backyard. It took a few days for a lab technician to identify it. The plant was ferndale ivy, a rare and invasive species found only in one location nearby, Edenmore Reserve, an abandoned hunting ground nearly 40 miles from Fairhill. The area had been closed to the public for years due to erosion and unsafe terrain, but it was not entirely abandoned. Hunters, hikers, and occasional thrill seekers still ventured into its dense, tangled woods. Police now had reason to believe that Auron had been there, possibly with Mireya's body. A specialized K9 unit was deployed to Edenmore. The dogs picked up a scent trail near the reserve's old access road. Deep in the forest, beyond a rusted chain-link fence and down a winding trail, they found a clearing with signs of recent human activity: fresh tire tracks, cigarette butts, and an empty water bottle. But no body. The trail had gone cold again, but detectives knew they were close. The blood, the hammer, and the unusual plant fibers were pieces of a puzzle slowly forming into something monstrous. Someone had tried to hide what happened. They had failed. Mireya's case was no longer just a missing persons investigation. It was quickly becoming a hunt for a killer hiding in plain sight. With the disturbing discovery in the Solance backyard and the trail pointing toward Edenmore Reserve, investigators intensified their search. The presence of the rare ferndale ivy on the hammer wasn't just a botanical clue, it was a roadmap. It gave detectives a reason to examine Auron Solance's movements more closely. The key to understanding what happened to Mireya might lie, not just in where she had been, but in where her husband had gone. Police acquired a warrant to access the GPS history from Auron's car. The data revealed a series of short, repetitive routes around town. Grocery runs, work trips, errands. But one route stood out. On the night Mireya disappeared, his car had traveled northwest, away from the usual suburban roads, and toward the edge of Edenmore Reserve. The timestamp showed the car had arrived there around 10:23 p.m. and remained parked in the area for over 2 hours. That trip was never mentioned in Auron's initial statement to police. Officers and forensic teams returned to the dense woodland of Edenmore, this time focusing on the specific location marked by the GPS data. The forest was thick and silent, overgrown with ivy and branches heavy with moss. After several hours of careful searching, officers discovered a collapsed deer blind near a shallow slope. It had once been used by hunters, but now stood broken and overrun by nature. Just below it, the earth looked different, slightly discolored and recently disturbed. When they began digging, everyone expected the worst. But what emerged was not Mireya's body. Instead, it was a large, decaying suitcase, wrapped in industrial plastic and tightly sealed with duct tape. The officers carefully opened it on site, expecting clothing or personal belongings. What they found inside changed the course of the investigation entirely. The suitcase contained several disturbing items: a loaded revolver, a black and white photograph of Auron with a woman who wasn't Mireya, and a box of stolen jewelry. Most of the jewelry was clearly old, several pieces engraved with initials no one recognized, but it was the photo that chilled investigators the most. The woman pictured with Auron had long auburn hair, and she was leaning into him in what looked like a warm, affectionate pose. Facial recognition software quickly confirmed her identity. She was Feyre Nelvine, a 28-year-old woman who had vanished 6 years earlier from a small town 2 states away. Her case had long gone cold. There were no suspects, no body, and no motive. Until now, there had never been a reason to connect her disappearance to Auron Solance. But the photograph told a different story, one of secret relationships and possible repeat offenses. Detectives began to suspect that Mireya's disappearance wasn't an isolated crime. Instead, it could be the latest in a series of violent acts committed by the same man. They started reviewing missing persons cases within a 100-mile radius. Similarities began to appear. Women who had gone missing suddenly, no bodies found, no suspects identified, and no prior criminal history. For the victims. Back at the station, Auron remained silent. He had refused to answer questions since his initial breakdown after seeing the hammer. Now, with the suitcase and the photograph as evidence, police charged him with obstruction of justice and tampering with a crime scene. Though they still didn't have a body, the web of connections was tightening fast. A forensic review of the revolver found in the suitcase revealed that it had been fired at least once in the past year. Ballistics linked it to an unsolved shooting involving an unidentified female victim found near the Missouri border. That victim had never been named. No fingerprints had been recovered. Now, there was a direct connection. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. Auron was not just a grieving husband. He was a man with a hidden past, tied to a missing woman from another state, a gun linked to a murder, and a backyard filled with secrets. Mireya's case had started with a missing person and a short grocery trip. But what it uncovered was a far more disturbing truth. The man who claimed to love her may have been leading a double life, haunted by secrets, and capable of horrors no one in Fairhill could have imagined. With Auron Solance now behind bars and a suitcase full of haunting clues connecting him to more than one missing woman, detectives returned once again to the Solance home. This time, they were looking for something specific, any sign that Mireya might have been kept, harmed, or even killed inside the house itself. The discovery of the hammer in the garden had raised suspicions. The connection to Farah Nelvine confirmed a pattern. Now, law enforcement needed proof, something definitive, that would tie Auron to the acts they feared he had committed. What they found beneath his basement would send shockwaves through the entire department. The basement of the Solance home had been searched briefly before, but only on the surface. On this return visit, investigators brought in specialized equipment, ground-penetrating, radar, thermal sensors, and luminol spray. At first glance, the space looked like any ordinary basement. It was cold and dim, filled with storage bins, old furniture, and holiday decorations. But in one corner, near a cluttered wall of boxes, they noticed something odd, a solid wooden panel where there should have been concrete. It had been painted over to blend with the wall, but the difference in texture was clear. When officers pried it loose, a narrow, dark passageway revealed itself behind the wall. The space was small, barely large enough to stand in, and it led to a hidden door, steel-plated, soundproofed, and reinforced with multiple locks. Inside was a secret room that looked more like a prison cell than anything that belonged in a family home. A single metal bed frame was bolted to the floor. Straps dangled from its corners. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling. Mounted in the far corner was a video camera, its lens covered in dust, but still connected to a nearby power source. The walls of the room were padded with old insulation foam. Beneath the foam, investigators discovered dried blood. Luminol lit the space up in a wash of glowing blue. The room was a chamber of silence and cruelty, carefully constructed to trap and contain. Forensics moved in. Hair samples collected from the bed and floor were sent to the lab. Within 48 hours, DNA results confirmed what detectives had already feared. Multiple samples matched Mireya Solance. Others matched Farah Nelvine. 2 other profiles were female, unidentified. The presence of multiple victims confirmed that the room had been used more than once, and likely for long periods. On Auron's seized laptop, a folder buried under layers of encryption was finally cracked open by cybercrime specialists. Inside were over 100 video files. Many of them were silent clips, carefully dated and labeled. Some were hours long. Others lasted only a few minutes. Each one showed a different woman inside the secret room. One of the final videos, timestamped just 3 days after Mireya had vanished, showed her lying motionless on the metal bed. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. A tray of untouched food sat beside her. That was the last time she was seen alive on camera. Even without a body, the footage changed everything. Prosecutors now had strong grounds for a murder charge. They also believed Auron had recorded his crimes not out of compulsion, but out of obsession, documenting his control, preserving it, reliving it. The horror inside that room was unimaginable, but it also revealed the methodical mind behind the crimes. Every piece of evidence had been hidden with precision. The chamber had been insulated to muffle screams. The walls had been painted over to blend with the basement. The camera system was wired to a battery backup, allowing recording. Even during power cuts, there was no panic in the way Auron operated. Only planning. Only silence. Investigators knew they were dealing with someone whose evil ran deeper than they had expected. Mireya hadn't simply been murdered. She had been held, recorded, and erased from her life in stages. Her final days had unfolded just beneath the feet of those who thought she was simply missing. And yet, the final truth still waited to be uncovered. One question remained unanswered. Where had Auron taken her body after the final video was recorded? As the investigation neared its climax, detectives were left with one final and haunting question. Where was Mireya Solance's body? They had the footage, the secret chamber, and the chilling evidence that linked Auron Solance to multiple missing women. But without a body, the weight of uncertainty still hung over the case like a heavy fog. The final piece of the puzzle was still out there, buried somewhere, waiting to be found. It was a forensic botanist who offered the next crucial lead. While examining the Ferndale ivy fragments found on the hammer, she noticed traces of another soil type mixed in with the ivy. It was a mineral-rich reddish clay known to be found only in one specific region, Blakewater Quarry, an abandoned mining site about 18 miles from Edenmore Reserve. The quarry had been closed for over 2 decades, left to decay under rain, wind, and layers of erosion. It wasn't on any recent maps, and most locals had forgotten it even existed. But to someone like Auron, who was methodical, patient, and obsessed with secrecy, it was the perfect place. Search teams descended upon Blakewater Quarry with ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and excavation equipment. The landscape was rugged and crumbling, with half-collapsed tunnels and jagged cliffs. For hours there was nothing, only broken stone and empty air. But then, near a dried-out basin at the far edge of the quarry, a cadaver dog signaled. Moments later, a second dog did the same. The dig began. At exactly 3:41 p.m., after 2 hours of cautious excavation, officers uncovered a shallow grave lined with plastic sheeting. Inside was the decomposed body of a woman, partially wrapped in what appeared to be a bedsheet. Though time and nature had taken their toll, her identity was confirmed within 48 hours through dental records and a matching tattoo on her left wrist. It was Mireya Solance. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the skull, matching the pattern of the hammer found buried in the Solance garden. Forensic analysis also revealed multiple fractures to her ribs and defensive wounds on her arms, indicating a struggle before her death. Mireya had fought back. Her final moments were ones of resistance, of courage in the face of cruelty. With the body recovered, the case against Auron reached its full weight. He was charged with first-degree murder, unlawful confinement, destruction of evidence, and multiple counts of aggravated assault tied to the other women believed to have passed through the secret chamber. Though the timeline of each crime varied, the method was always the same: lure, isolate, imprison, erase. The public reaction was explosive. News outlets across the country descended on Fairhill. The story of the soft-spoken man with a neat lawn and a monstrous secret spread quickly. Vigils were held in Mireya's memory, and communities began sharing missing persons reports that matched the pattern, hoping for answers to long unsolved disappearances. But amid the national outrage and media frenzy, a deeper unease remained. Authorities had identified at least 2 other DNA profiles from the secret room that didn't match any known missing persons. Their identities were still unknown. The videos showed their faces, but no names, no origin stories. The fear that Auron had committed even more murders, off the record, never reported, began to settle into the investigation like a permanent shadow. As Auron awaited trial, he remained silent, offering no explanation, no remorse, and no confession. His cold stare in court told the world that whatever drove his actions remained locked inside his mind. He refused plea deals, refused to testify. And so, the only truths came from what Mireya left behind: the footage, the fibers, the bruises, the grave. Her story, once a simple missing persons case, had opened the door to a darker reality: a predator living in plain sight, constructing his own dungeon beneath a suburban home, hiding his crimes with chilling precision. Mireya's last moments, caught on CCTV, were just the beginning. What followed was a descent into horror, and a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones who smile at the front door.